Hi guys, welcome back to Nyx Reads. I have been loving everybody's mid-year freakout tag. Such a great way to recap the highs and lows of the first 6 reading months. So far this year, I have read 48 books, technically 47, but I just literally finished a book right before filming, which I'm also gonna mention, so I'm gonna include that. Either way, this is the most books I've read in this kind of time frame in years. If not, could I say ever? I'm not sure, I can't remember. So yeah, I read almost 50 books in 6 months, and here's what happened. Shall we do a few stats to begin with? Biggest mood were reflective, emotional, and dark. 15% of the books I've read are nonfiction, which for me is a record number. My most read genres are literary, contemporary, and thriller. Mystery right after. The format is a bit interesting. So 56% of the books I read in actual print. I've listened to 40% as audiobooks and 4% digital. That is new to me. I have been reading the Brandon Sanderson Skyward novellas on my phone, and the book I finished today was my very first ebook that I read completely on an iPad. I borrowed my sister's iPad. It was actually quite the pleasant experience. And the only 2 authors I read more than 1 book of are Agatha Christie, which we're not surprised about, and Brandon Sanderson, because as I mentioned, I've been reading through his novellas, and then I also started the Mistborn trilogy. Average rating is 3.57 stars, which is not too bad actually. I mean, I've read quite a few 4-star books, but a fair share of 2- and 3-star books as well. On to the actual tag questions. What is the best book you've read so far in 2022? I can't just answer with 1 book, I'm sorry. First off, My Life in France by Julia Child. I've mentioned this a few times now on my channel. It's featured in my summer reading recommendations. This is a memoir by Julia Child and her nephew Alex Prudhomme. It is fantastic. It's quirky, it's endearing, it's full of love for life and new experiences and food, of course, ingredients, recipes. Just reading about how a cookbook gets to be written, what kind of labor of love it is. It was a great experience, and just, you know, the relationship between Julia Child and Paul Child, goals. This is the type of nonfiction that you fly through. Absolutely adored this. I have a middle grade answer, that is Starfish by Lisa Phipps. Before this, I don't think I've ever read a novel in verse, so this was a new experience to me. And I just love this. This is young Ellie's story on how she deals with being a big girl and being bullied, having a new therapist, one of her parents being a total asshole, basically. It's emotional, it's funny, it's inspiring, everything that you want in a middle grade. And lastly, a literary work that I just finished in June, so stay tuned for my June wrap up to hear more about this. It is so incredibly unlike me to have this as a favorite, but it just happened. Pure Color by Sheila Heti. Incredibly lyrical, beautiful prose. Every other sentence can be a standalone quote. It is so pretentious. It reads as lyrical and mysterious as a poem, and yet it is very frank in its message. We live in a world where it is assumed that it is just the first draft of God's work. And in this first draft of the world, we focus on Mira. She falls in love with a woman named Annie. She loses her dad and deals with grief. I'm struggling to find the words to describe this book. You'll either love it or hate it, I think. This is the kind of book where I was looking forward to reading a new chapter. I wasn't thinking about the next book on my TBR. I think I have to reread this at some point. As you can see, this is actually a library book, and I already bought my own copy. This book is art, but it's very palatable art. What is the best sequel you've read so far in 2022? I think my answer to this question is none. I started a few series, but I haven't gotten to any book 2 yet, and I think the only continuation of a series I read was Read On by Brandon Sanderson, which is a short novella between book 2 and 3 of the Skyward series, and this was 3 stars. It wasn't great, so honestly I don't really have an answer to this one. Skip. What is a new release you haven't read yet but want to? The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. This takes place at the Boston Public Library, where it is super quiet until there's a piercing scream of a terrified woman. Turns out she's murdered, and it looks like there's something like 4 people in the library who could have done it, and we have to figure out who did do it. So it's a classic whodunit in a library. Sounds like a closed circle mystery to me. I am really looking forward to this one. What is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year? I only have one other book on my anticipated reads, but I don't know if I'm that hot about it, to be honest. So it's Carrie Soto is Back. I haven't done any further research on what else is coming out towards the end of the year, so I'm gonna put a pin on this question. What was the biggest surprise? I have to give this to The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This was a surprise on many levels. It is marketed as horror. The type of story that you get with this, and just the twists, I was speechless. My jaw dropped open at I think 1 a.m. or at 12 when I got to a certain turning point, and I couldn't put the book down afterwards. I stayed up until I think 2 in the morning just finishing up the book. I didn't expect such an impact from this book, and I did not expect any of the twists in the, I think is it the second half of the book. What is a favorite new author, debut, or new to you? As the only repeat authors I read are Agatha Christie and Brandon Sanderson, I don't really have a new favorite author because Agatha Christie is a new favorite from last year. And Brandon Sanderson, if you watched my previous wrap-ups, it's complicated right now. But I have a few new authors whose works I just picked up this year, and I definitely want to read more from them. So definitely Catriona Ward. I do have Sundial on my TBR. Aiden Thomas, who wrote Cemetery Boys. That was such a good book. YA, actually. I think they just announced that there's going to be a second book. That is something I will 100% pick up. Zoraida Cordova, who wrote The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. Also, I want to pick up another book by her, which I'm actually noticing a pattern here. Because the next one I was about to say is Isabel Cañas, who wrote The Hacienda, which I just finished today. Do you see a pattern here? Because I do. Just give me all of your Latinx stories, especially if they're gothic romance or gothic horror, magical realism. I want them all. If you have any suggestions for books along those lines, so Cemetery Boys, Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, The Hacienda, and Mexican Gothic, please leave them down below. I think one of the reasons all of these books worked so well for me is because of these Spaniard influences. In this case, it was Mexico. Sorry. I'm ethnically Filipino, and the Philippines were also a Spanish colony, so there's actually so many similarities in the culture. That includes food, it includes religion, it includes superstitions. I hope that counts as answer to that question. Who is your newest fictional crush? Up until yesterday, I didn't have a good answer. I would have answered Tate from Where the Crawdads Sing. I pictured him to be kind of cute, like a nice gentleman type, loving, protective. My heart wasn't in it, but since I finished The Hacienda today, I'm counting this in my answers. I'm gonna say Andres, who is an aspiring priest. I would say him. It's been a long time since I've read about 2 characters who I just really wanted to get together. What is a book that made you cry? I have a very specific answer to that. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Very last sentence. I did not shed a tear throughout the whole book. I was gripped, but I didn't cry, but at the last sentence, I did. And just to torture myself sometimes, when now I walk into bookshops and usually The Song of Achilles is one of the books that's, you know, out on the tables, I just flip to the last page, read the last sentence, and just see if I feel something, you know, just to check if I'm alive. And I do. Do not spoil yourself though. If you haven't read this yet and you're watching this, don't be tempted to read it, because it only works if you've read the book. The only other book where I cried is This Shining Life by Harriet Klein, but not because of the characters or the book itself, because it wasn't that great, but because it is about grief. It is about family man dying of cancer. This is not a spoiler, it is the premise of the book. These kind of books, they just make me think about my own life and, you know, picturing people in my life dying of that disease. So that made me cry, but not the book itself. It's more just me spiraling. It's not a great quality. What is a book that made you happy? The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Kind of your typical trope of grumpy middle-aged man meeting a bunch of special kids, and they just turn around his view on life and he becomes a better man. This book did live up to its hype. I think it's great, it's worth the read. The Switch by Beth O'Leary, typical rom-com book where you really do like the heroine, or in this case it's two main characters actually. Lena and her grandma. Grandma Eileen moves to the big city to start dating. How can that not make you happy? In the meantime, Lena moves to the countryside to step in her grandma's life, where, you know, she goes from high-powered big city girl to, okay, I need to tend to, you know, the community and the garden and stuff like that. It's that kind of vibe. What is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received? I haven't read this yet, but Circe by Madeline Miller. You bet I'm gonna get to this one this year because I love the Song of Achilles so much. It's just beautiful. It's hardcover, it's shiny, and it has the like uneven edge thingy going on, so like the feel of the pages is just really nice. And I like this cover as well from Pure Color. It kind of reminds me of a Pantone color swatch, a bit more modern, a bit more simplistic. And the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Well, I need to finish my spring TBR. I think I have 2 books left on that. My summer TBR, which I just scratched the surface on. I'm already building my autumn and winter TBR, so just by default to those books I want to get. But to name a few specific books, I want to get to this one. It's Five Little Indians by Michelle Good. I picked this up in Ottawa when I was there for the Tulip Festival in May. I thought it was a fitting place to pick a book up by a First Nation author, and I just don't want this to be sitting around on my shelf for too long. The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. As you know, I've been struggling to find a really great fantasy series, and this one just might be it. And just in general, to read more books from my physical TBR, because I have another haul coming up. I have the books that I picked up from my library sale, and just some books that have been on my shelves for way too long. That could be a separate video actually. I just wanted to have a nice conversation with you guys about the books that I've read so far, and I've just had a very great reading year so far, and I just really hope that I can keep going, not necessarily at this speed, at this rate, just because, you know, work is a bit tougher these days. I just hope for all of us that we can stay excited about the books that we read and not make it all about the numbers that we achieve in read pages or read books for the year. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.